Picture this. It's 1982, and James Dyson is standing in a cramped coach house behind his farmhouse in Bath, England. His hands are covered in dust, cardboard's everywhere, and failed vacuum cleaner prototypes are littering every surface. James has just completed prototype number 2627, and just like the 2626 before it, this one doesn't work either. Now, his wife Deirdre is teaching art classes just to keep food on the table for their 3 young children. The mortgage payment's overdue again, and now the bank is calling. Their friends, people who care about them, think James has lost his mind. He's been at this for years, walking across his yard every single morning to tinker with cyclones and suction and dust separation. Years of failure after failure after failure. But here's what's extraordinary about this moment. James isn't discouraged from this, not even close. In fact, he's excited because prototype 2627 taught him something that 2626 didn't. It reveals another clue in the puzzle, and tomorrow morning, he's going to make the same walk back into that coach house and build prototype 2628. By the time he's done, there will be 5,127 prototypes. 5,127 attempts. And every single one, except the very last one, will be what most people would call a failure. But James Dyson doesn't see failure in the way that most people do. And that difference in perspective, that's what turned a broke, desperate inventor into one of the wealthiest self-made billionaires in Britain. Welcome to Inflection Moments. I'm David Franklin, and you and I are about to dive into something fascinating. You know that moment when everything changes for an entrepreneur? When one decision, one pivot, one breakthrough suddenly shifts their entire trajectory. That's what we're hunting for today. If you're building something, if you're that founder grinding it out, making those impossible decisions that keep you up at night, this episode is for you. Because today, we're going inside the mind of one of the most successful entrepreneurs in history to uncover the exact moments that transformed their journey from ordinary to extraordinary. Here's what we're doing. We're dissecting the 5 most pivotal inflection points in their career, but more importantly, we're uncovering the strategic thinking behind each decision, the kind of insight that separates the builders from the dreamers. Ready? Let's get started. All right, let's jump back to 1970. James has just graduated from the Royal College of Art in London. He studied furniture and interior design, not engineering, not business. He's got long hair, he's wearing flowery shirts, and candidly, he's got no clue what he's going to do with his life. Keep in mind, James's dad died when he was just 9. Money's tight, his direction is unclear, and he's qualified to do basically nothing that the job market actually wants. And then he meets a guy called Jeremy Fry. Now, Jeremy is no ordinary person. He's an eccentric British inventor and an engineer, and he's also the heir to the Fry's chocolate fortune. So he's a well-connected guy, and he's running a company called Rotork, where he's developing all kinds of interesting stuff. And Jeremy is looking for someone to help him design a flat-hulled, high-speed boat, something that can land on beaches without needing jetties, something that the military might want to use. So when Jeremy meets James, at the time a long-haired art school grad, he doesn't ask for his credentials. He doesn't care about his GPA or his experience. He just thinks, here's a bright kid, and let's employ him. And get this, James knows nothing about boats, nothing about marine engineering, and nothing about any of the things this project actually requires. But Jeremy doesn't want someone who knows. In fact, he prefers someone who doesn't. And this is where the magic starts happening. Because here's the thing. Dyson arrives at Rotork carrying all this baggage from formal education. He's been trained to revere experts. When you've got a problem, you find the specialist. You do research, you run calculations, and you figure out the right way to do things before you actually start building. But Jeremy, he operates on a completely different wavelength. James comes to him with a question, something like, should we talk to someone about hydrodynamics? And Jeremy's response is so good, I've got to just give the direct quote here. He says, the lake is down there, the Land Rover's over there, Take a plank of wood down to the lake, tow it behind the boat, and look at what happens. That's it. That's his entire methodology. Don't theorize, don't calculate, don't consult the experts. Just go do it. Observe what happens and learn from what you see. James later writes about this moment with real reverence. He says in his own words, "Here was a man who was not interested in experts. Jeremy risks a little with the possibility of gaining a lot. It is exactly what I do now at Dyson." Notice that last part. James is recognizing that he's witnessing a way of approaching work and problem solving that he's going to spend the rest of his life implementing. And it's a radical philosophy because everything the education system had taught him is being completely dismantled. So, how does Jeremy actually work with him? When James comes to him and says, "I've had an idea," Jeremy's offer is remarkably simple. You know where the workshop is, go and do it. No research, no preliminary sketches, no theoretical workings, and if something doesn't work one way, you try it another way until it does. So Jeremy teaches James that with enthusiasm and intelligence, almost anything is possible. And expertise often gets in the way. So over the next few years, they work on project after project, and together they build that flat-hulled fiberglass landing craft called the Sea Truck, with 3 tons capacity, and it can land on beaches without any harbor facilities. It's so good, in fact, that the Egyptian army actually uses it in the 1973 Yom Kippur War. On top of that, together they design a 4-wheel drive wheelchair. They keep tackling problems, and James is learning something profound with each one. But the real lesson here isn't about boats or wheelchairs. It's about something much deeper. And James states it explicitly, and he writes it down. He says, the root principle was to do things your own way. It didn't matter how other people did it. It didn't matter if it could be done better. As long as it works and it's exciting, people will follow you. So think about what he's saying. You don't need to do things the way they've always been done. All you need is something that actually works and is genuinely different. So looking at what happens commercially, the Sea Truck is a big success, and it even wins several prestigious design awards, which is not bad for a design by an art school grad with no marine engineering background. But the money almost doesn't matter. The Sea Truck is just the thing for James to absorb a completely different operating system for how to approach problems. Because years later, when James is talking about his philosophy as a vacuum cleaner salesman, because that's actually what he did briefly, selling vacuums, he says something that shows just how deeply Jeremy's influence runs. He says, I usually solve problems from the point of view of frustration, hoping that other people feel the same way. So James is starting with frustration, his own frustration, starting with something that genuinely annoys him, something that doesn't work properly. That's his North Star. And that mentality, this bias towards action, towards personal frustration, towards just trying things and seeing what happens, that becomes the foundation for everything James is going to do for the next 40 years. And here's what's wild. This approach contradicts everything conventional business wisdom teaches. MBA programs will tell you to do the market research, consult experts, analyze the data, and minimize risk. But Jeremy taught James to ignore all of that. And the message that James takes from this is that you don't need the right background. You don't need a detailed plan. All you need is curiosity, the willingness to experiment, and the courage to do things your own way. And that lesson is going to become extraordinarily important. Okay, inflection point number 2. It's now 1974, and James is back at his farmhouse, and he's renovating the place. And he's using a traditional wheelbarrow to move soil and materials and debris around the property. And he's seeing firsthand all the ways a wheelbarrow is broken. The wheel is too narrow, so it's going to sink into the ground. The metal rusts because the sharp edges dig into door frames and damage them. It's a terrible design. And here's the thing. It hasn't changed in decades, for centuries actually. Everyone just accepts that wheelbarrows are annoying and imperfect. But James, he's still got Jeremy's voice in his head. He's been trained to look at something broken and think, I can make this better. So he designs the Ballbarrow, which uses a large plastic ball instead of a narrow wheel. The ball doesn't sink into the mud. The rounded design means it won't damage door frames. It's lighter, more maneuverable, and genuinely better. And this isn't some hobby project. He's created something that matters. So James finds a partner and they form a company called Kirk Dyson and they start production. Within a year, just 1 year, the Ballbarrow captures more than half of the UK wheelbarrow market. They're selling 45,000 units a year. Annual revenue hits 600 grand. For a brand new product in what's supposed to be a boring, commoditized market, this is extraordinary. And then everything falls apart because the business model is fundamentally broken, even if nobody sees it yet. Here's the thing about wheelbarrows and garden equipment. They are highly seasonal. You sell in spring and summer, and then nothing for months. Nothing. But at the same time, you've got to keep your workforce employed all year round. You've got to build up inventory. You've got to manage this brutal cash flow problem. Every month in winter, you're bleeding money. So Kirk Dyson is constantly strapped for cash. They're always just barely getting by. And then Dyson hires a sales manager called John Brannan. John's got experience, credentials, he looks good on paper. But soon enough, John does something inexplicable. While James is traveling, trying to set up licensing deals in the US, John leaves Kirk Dyson and he goes to work for a competitor called Glassco. But before he leaves, he undermines the US licensing negotiations. He sets up Glassco to essentially steal the Ballbarrow design in a direct act of sabotage. And the personal pain gets even worse during this period for James because this is when his mother dies. So he's dealing with profound grief while fighting to save his company. He's watching everything he built fall apart. The board is frustrated with the mounting debt and wanting to focus on the financials, are no longer interested in the product and are desperate for someone to blame. And they decide that the problem is James himself, the inventor who wouldn't compromise, the guy who wants to keep iterating and improving instead of just manufacturing and selling. He's the one they want to blame. So in January 1979, they force him out. James is kicked out of his own company, the business he created around his invention, and he loses the rights to the Ballbarrow. And it's devastating for him. He compares it in his own writing to losing a child. He's been betrayed by his partner. He's been outvoted by his board, and now he's watching his creation go on without him. But here's what's extraordinary about James's response to this disaster. He doesn't get bitter and quit. Instead, he starts asking himself, what went wrong? Not who betrayed me, but what did I not understand about how to build a company? So taking a step back, James takes a few lessons from the wreckage. The first one is to never, ever give up control of your creation. The moment James involved outside investors who didn't understand the product or the vision, he became vulnerable. But the most important shift in James's thinking is this. He realizes that to truly maintain control of his vision, he needs to become a manufacturer himself. This goes against everything conventional wisdom says. Manufacturing is capital intensive, it's risky, and it's operationally complicated. The smart move, the move every consultant would recommend, is to license your technology to the established players because they have distribution. They've got the manufacturing infrastructure and they've got brand recognition. You collect your royalties and you move on. But James has learned the hard way that licensing means losing control, and losing control means your vision gets diluted or stolen. So James makes a decision that shows he's learned from his mistakes. The next time he invents something, he's going to build it himself. He's going to manufacture it, and he's going to own it end to end. And he's going to maintain complete control. In 1979, when he leaves Kirk Dyson, he has no company, no income, and no manufacturing capability, but he has something more valuable. He has clarity about what not to do. And that clarity is going to carry him through the next phase of his life, the one that nearly breaks him financially, but ends up changing an entire industry. Okay, inflection point number 3 now, and we're still in 1979, just months after James has been forced out of his own company. He's 32 years old, with young children, a mortgage, and earning no income. He and his wife Deirdre have just moved to a farmhouse in Bathford, near Bath in the UK. And behind the house sits an 18th century coach house with no heat, no running water, just a workbench, an electric drill, and an old Victorian mangle. Every morning, James walks across the yard to that coach house, and every single day for the next 15 years, he's going to work on an idea that came to him while running the Ballbarrow factory. Here's what happened. In that Ballbarrow factory, they spray paint wheelbarrow frames with powdered paint. The excess powder would get caught in his cloth filter and clog it constantly. So for James, that's the sort of thing that's annoying because it slows down production. So James visits a local sawmill and saw something that changes everything: a 30-foot high industrial cyclone. This is going to sound a bit geeky, but it's important to explain what it is. This cyclone, it uses centrifugal force to separate sawdust from air. It was, as James later describes it, a form of filter that never clogged. At the same time, at home, James had bought what was supposed to be the world's most powerful vacuum cleaner, a Hoover Junior. But as soon as the bag started filling with dust, the pores would clog. The suction would drop immediately. He'd spent all this money on a powerful vacuum that barely worked. These two problems, the clogged paint filter and the clogged vacuum bag, they collide in his mind. So James starts thinking about how he could build a small cyclone and put it inside the vacuum cleaner so he can make a bagless vacuum that never lost suction. It's such a simple idea, but nobody else has done it. Not Hoover, not Electrolux, none of the established manufacturers that have these unlimited R&D budgets. So James wants to solve this problem, not because the market research was showing demand, not because any VCs are calling with funding, but because he's frustrated. The existing vacuums don't work properly, and he believes, deeply believes, that if he's frustrated, other people probably are too. It's a desire, born from what he calls passionate anger. That's his starting point. And what happens in the years that follow is almost unbelievable. So let me just lay it out. First, there's a technical challenge. To build this, you need to build a cyclone small enough to fit in a vacuum cleaner while generating enough centrifugal force to separate these tiny dust particles from air. In plain English, nobody has done that before. The physics are complicated. There are countless things you got to consider: the height of the cyclone, the diameter, the angle of the taper, the speed of the airflow, the entry point. And each of these variables affects the others in unpredictable ways. And James, he can't just calculate his way to the answer, because keep in mind, this is the late 70s, early 80s. Computers that could model this stuff, they don't exist. At least not in the ways that he can access. So he's got to do this himself. Build, test, observe, and adjust. He does it again. Build, test, observe, and adjust. One change at a time, because if you change multiple things at once, you're not going to know which change caused which effect. That's going to take forever. But the technical challenge is almost secondary to what's really happening. The Dysons are going deeper and deeper into debt. They have to take out a second mortgage on the house. His wife Deirdre is selling her artwork. She's now teaching art classes. They borrow continuously. They're growing their own vegetables, and Deirdre's making clothes for the children. By prototype 15, their third child is born. By prototype 2627, remember that number from the opening? Deirdre's teaching art lessons multiple days a week, and they're watching every penny. By prototype 3727, they're in serious financial trouble. The bank is calling again. The overdue notices pile up. Their friends think James has lost his mind. Who spends years of their life in a shed building vacuum cleaners? Who risks their family home for that? The same friends who encouraged them during the Ballbarrow years are now quietly suggesting that James should get a real job. And then there are the experts. His former partners from Kirk Dyson warn him, if there was a better vacuum cleaner, Hoover or Electrolux would have invented it already. They have all the resources, all the engineers, all the R&D budget. If it was possible, they would have done it. This is airtight logic, right? The big companies in the industry would have solved this already if it was solvable. The fact that it hasn't been solved is evidence that it can't be solved, and therefore you're wasting your time. This is the ultimate conflict. Everyone telling James to quit versus his stubborn conviction that he's onto something. Here's where James's philosophy is so radically different from most people, but if you listen to any of our previous Inflection Moments episodes, one that mirrors very closely how the elite founders perceive failure. James doesn't see these failed prototypes as failures at all. Each one teaches him something. Each one reveals new data, a new relationship between variables, so it's not defeat, it's information. James later talks about this in his own words. He says, by the time I made my 5,127th prototype, the ultimately successful patent, I'd spend 15 years at it. 15 years. That's how long it took. But I learned something from each new prototype. The failures are interesting because you're asking, why didn't it work? What can I do to make it work? It's iterative development. Viscerally experiencing failure is incredibly important. Now imagine you're James. You're in a freezing coach house. Your wife is worried about money. You've just tested prototype 500 and it doesn't work. What do most people do? They're going to get discouraged. They wonder if they've wasted years of their life and they start thinking about job hunting. But James is excited because he just learned that if you make the cyclone a few degrees steeper, the separation efficiency improves. That's the key insight here. In James's mind, progress isn't measured by did it work, but by did I learn something. Now, this isn't to say James never gets discouraged. He's only human after all. He talks honestly about days when things go backwards, days when he makes a change and performance actually gets worse, days when he genuinely wonders if he's wasting his time. The difference is he doesn't let that discouragement stop him. James has two things going for him here. First, he remembers Jeremy Fry. Just try it, don't overthink it, build it, test it, and learn from it. He's carrying that philosophy forward every single day in that coach house. And second, James is motivated by proving a point. When experts tell him it's impossible, it makes him more determined. He wants to show Hoover and Electrolux and all the other manufacturers who rejected him that they're wrong. So again, in 1993, after 5,127 prototypes, after 15 years, after nearly going broke, it works. He's created a vacuum cleaner that uses cyclonic separation to pull dust and dirt into a clear plastic bin. No bag, no clogging, and constant suction. And the moment it works, James is still not out of the woods because the work isn't done yet, because now he has to figure out how to commercialize it. And that, it turns out, will be almost as hard as inventing the thing. But here's the brutal reality. James is in debt to the tune of nearly $1 million. And that's devastating because he's got no manufacturing capability, no distribution, and no brand recognition. Nothing. As a result, he approaches the major vacuum manufacturers, Hoover, Electrolux, Black & Decker, and he presents his revolutionary technology, and all of them reject him. And they reject him for a very important reason, because the vacuum bag market is $1 billion market in Europe alone. These companies make more money selling replacement bags than they do selling the vacuums themselves. It's the classic razor blade model. So Dyson's bagless vacuum threatens their most profitable revenue stream. It's not that they don't understand the technology, they understand it perfectly. They just don't want it to exist. One executive literally tells him, if there was a market for bagless vacuums, we would have invented it already. Or put another way, if your technology were actually good, we would have copied it by now. But they're not going to copy it because it threatens them. So James tries to license the technology. He spends the next few years flying around the world, pitching his cyclone vacuum to anyone who's going to listen. Some express interest, then they back out. Some try to copy the technology without licensing it properly. Because in 1985, Amway produces a vacuum very similar to Dyson's design after he'd sent them confidential information. So Dyson sues for patent infringement, and it takes 6 years to settle. 6 years of legal battles, of uncertainty, of fighting to protect something he created while trying to commercialize it. But here's what changes everything. In the mid-80s, a Japanese company called Apex expresses interest, and by March 1986, they launched the G-Force, which is a reworked version of Dyson's design. It's this pink and sleek-looking device. You should Google it. It's really interesting. And they sell it in Japan for about $2,000, which seems crazy expensive, and it is. And it's unusual. But in Japan, it becomes a status symbol. In 1991, it wins the International Design Fair Prize in Japan. So suddenly, the bagless vacuum isn't some failed British inventor's crazy dream. It's an award-winning product that's selling in one of the world's most sophisticated consumer markets. The G-Force doesn't make Dyson wealthy, but it does something crucial. It generates enough royalty income that Dyson can finally do what he's been told repeatedly never to do. He can become a manufacturer, he can build his own company, and he can maintain control. So here's what James takes from those 5,127 prototype, from 15 years of financial struggle, from rejection by every major manufacturer. In James's own words, he says, failure is interesting. It's part of making progress. You never learn from success, but you do learn from failure. I made 5,127 prototypes of my vacuum before I got it right. There were 5,126 failures, but I learned from each one. And that's how I came up with the solution. As a founder listening to that, that is everything. That's the entire philosophy of what it's like being an entrepreneur, distilled into one statement. Okay, inflection point number 4 now. It's 1993, and James Dyson is finally ready. The money from the G-Force in Japan has given him enough capital to do what seemed impossible just a few years ago: manufacture his own vacuum cleaner. He finds his local manufacturer in Wales and starts production in a little old town called Wrexham, a place some of you might be quite familiar with now that Hollywood actors Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney became owners of a football club a few years ago. And James is designing what will become the DC01, the first Dyson-branded vacuum cleaner. And he's about to make a series of decisions, according to every marketing consultant and every piece of market research available, that are completely and utterly wrong. So let's talk about what the data is telling him, because this is so crucial. The marketing consultants run their focus groups, and they test how consumers react to different design options, and the feedback comes back consistently negative. So listen to the feedback that some of the people are saying at the time. That clear bin is disgusting. I don't want to see my dirt. Hide it. £200 for a vacuum cleaner? That's 3 times what a Hoover costs. No one's going to pay that. Say goodbye to the bag. I don't hate bags. I barely think about bags. Why would I pay a premium not to have a bag? Mail order? How am I supposed to buy a vacuum through a catalogue? On every single major decision, the transparent bin, the price point, the marketing message, the distribution strategy, the market research says one thing, and Dyson's instinct, based on 15 years of personal experience, says another. And James has to choose: trust the data or trust his gut. But here's the key part. James understands that most people don't know what they want until they see it. And James talks about this in his own words. He says, most people don't really know exactly what they want. Or if they do, it's only from what they know, what is available or possible at the time. So think about that for a moment. If you'd asked people in 1985 if they want a bagless vacuum cleaner, what would they have said? They would have said no, because they'd never experienced one. They had no reference point. They only knew vacuum bags. Bags were normal. The idea of seeing your dirt swirling around inside a plastic container, that would have seemed weird or disgusting or both. This is exactly what happened in Dyson's focus groups. People react negatively to the transparent bin because they're evaluating against their existing experience. They're not thinking, wait, maybe seeing the dirt would actually be satisfying because it proves the vacuum's working. So James has learned something that market research can't capture. People can tell you what they like about things that exist, but they can't tell you what they want from things that don't yet exist. They don't have a reference point. So why does James make the bin transparent anyway? Because he's been using prototype vacuums for years. He knows what it's like to see the dirt swirling around inside. And you know what? It's not disgusting. It's satisfying. It's proof. When you see how much dirt came out of your floors, you have visual proof that this thing actually works. And here's the other thing. James is thinking about what made the G-Force successful in Japan. Because part of its appeal wasn't just that it worked better, it was that it looked different. It stood out. The transparent technology, the cyclones visible inside the vacuum, that became part of the visual story and part of the brand identity. Now on price, Dyson wants to launch at £200, more than 3 times the price of a typical vacuum cleaner. The consultants say people will never pay this. Even if the technology is better, there's a price ceiling for vacuums. It's psychological. It's the price people have been paying for decades. Asking them to pay 3 times that is lunacy. But here's what James knows that the market research doesn't capture. When you show people a significant difference in performance, they're willing to pay for it. This is key. If you put 2 vacuum cleaners side by side and vacuum the same floor with one, then switch to the other, people see it. The Dyson picks up more dirt, noticeably more, and that's visual proof. And when you have visual proof of a better product, the price justifies itself. It's not that people don't want to pay. It's that they won't pay for something they can't see as different. But if they can see it, they'll pay. And then there's the messaging. Say goodbye to the bag doesn't test well in focus groups. People don't hate vacuum bags enough to be motivated by that message. So the consultants recommend downplaying the bagless aspect and focusing on other features and finding a message that resonates better. But again, James has been around vacuum cleaners for years. He knows the frustration. Bags clog. You buy a powerful vacuum And after 6 months, the suction drops dramatically because the bag has clogged pores. It's a design flaw that nobody talks about, but everyone experiences. Dyson believes that if he's frustrated by this, millions of others are too. They just haven't named it yet. They haven't identified clogged bags as a problem because it seems like a normal part of owning a vacuum. So say goodbye to the bag isn't just a marketing message, it's identifying the problem that people didn't know they had. And then it's saying, here's the solution. And finally, let's talk about distribution. Because James plans to start with mail order catalogs, not traditional retail channels and not department stores, catalogs. Again, the consultants say it's risky. It limits reach. It makes it harder to build market share because people buy vacuum cleaners by going to stores and seeing them in person, not by flipping through a catalog. But James is thinking strategically because the major retail channels are controlled by established competitors. If he tries to get DC1 vacuums into the big distributors like Dixon's or John Lewis, he's competing for shelf space with Hoover, with Electrolux, with brands that have been there for decades. He can't win that battle. Not yet, at least. But with mail order, he has direct access to customers. He can tell the full story. He can explain why it's different, how it works, and why it costs more. He can show videos. He can provide testimonials, and he can build demand directly without needing retail gatekeepers. And once he's built demand, once customers are asking for Dyson at retail stores, then the retailers will carry him. And by doing this, he's creating pull from the customer and not relying on push through distribution channels. So James has all this market research pointing in one direction. Every consultant saying the same thing. The transparent bin won't work, the price is too high, the messaging won't resonate, and the distribution is risky. Now remember, James is 50 years old at this point. He's invested tremendous amounts of his own capital. He's had a company before, the Ballbarrow, remember, that got taken from him. He knows what it's like to fail, and he knows what failure costs. So this is a genuinely terrifying moment for him. Not some romantic follow your dream moment. It's, I have to choose between what the data's telling me and what my gut is telling me. And if I'm wrong, I lose everything. But James makes the decision. He's going to ignore the market research. He's going to keep the transparent bin. He's going to price it at £200. He's going to emphasize say goodbye to the bag, and he's going to start with mail order. So James is betting his company on the belief that his 15 years of experience using vacuum cleaners is more valuable than what consultants can learn from focus groups. So the DC1 launches in 93, and within 18 months, it becomes the best-selling vacuum cleaner in the UK. Let that sink in. The most expensive vacuum cleaner on the market, the one with a transparent bin nobody wants to see, the one with the bagless messaging that supposedly won't resonate, sold through mail order catalogs instead of retail stores, it becomes the best-selling vacuum cleaner in the country. And by 1995, just 2 years after launch, Dyson has the highest market share of any player in the industry, even higher than Hoover. The company that didn't exist 3 years earlier is now the market leader in a category that's been dominated for decades by the same multinational companies. So here's what changed. The transparent bin that customers supposedly hated, turns out they love it. The high price that supposedly couldn't work, just like James expected, people don't mind paying more when the product performs significantly better. When you can vacuum a floor with a Hoover, then go over the same floor with a Dyson and show the difference in dirt collected, the price justifies itself. And the say goodbye to the bag message that supposedly won't test well, it resonates deeply because Dyson has identified a genuine pain point that customers hadn't even named yet. The constant suction, the fact that a Dyson doesn't lose performance as the cylinder fills up, becomes a key differentiator. People now realize that they've been tolerating degrading performance from bag vacuums their entire lives, and now there's an alternative. And the mail order strategy that was supposedly too risky, it works perfectly. It builds demand, and customers ask for a Dyson at retail stores. The retailers realize that they've got to carry him or they'll lose customers. By the time Dyson's ready to go into mass retail distribution, he's already the market leader. He's negotiating from a position of strength, not weakness. So every single thing the market research said wouldn't work, works perfectly. So here's what's profound about this moment. Dyson doesn't ignore market research because he's arrogant or because he thinks he's smarter than everyone. He ignores it because he understood something critical about how people evaluate new products. Market research is good at telling you what people like about existing products, but it's terrible at predicting what people will want from products that don't yet exist. And with breakthrough innovations, you're always working with products that don't exist yet. It just makes me think of a couple of examples that we've explored on Inflection Moments already, in particular, the Jensen Huang and Larry Ellison episodes where they create markets that don't exist yet. And James talks about this directly. He says at Dyson, market research is not the main driver behind product development. What James is saying is use market research for some things, but don't let it drive your core product decisions. Don't let it kill your vision before you've even tested it in the market. Because here's the hard truth. If Dyson had listened to the market research and made the bin opaque, dropped the price, de-emphasized the bagless technology, and followed conventional distribution, he would have had a product that looked like everything else already on the market, at a price point where it couldn't be profitable with no clear differentiation. Instead, he would have just been another vacuum cleaner company, and there are hundreds of those. Instead, he did the exact opposite of what the data told him. He trusted his own experience, and he created something genuinely new. And the market, as it turns out, was ready for it. Okay, final inflection point now. It's February 1999, and James gets a phone call that changes everything. It's from Hoover, the brand whose name is literally synonymous with vacuum cleaning in the UK, is about to launch something called the Triple Vortex. It's supposed to be their answer to Dyson, their bagless vacuum, their innovation. Dyson's team get hold of their pre-launch trade materials and they buy one of the Triple Vortex vacuums and they take it apart in their lab. What they find infuriates them. Hoover has essentially copied his patented dual cyclone technology, not improved it, not developed their own approach, copied it. Keep in mind, this is the same company that rejected Dyson's technology in the 80s, the same company that told him if there was a market for bagless vacuums, we would have invented it already. The same company that's been profiting enormously from selling replacement bags while actively discouraging customers from thinking about alternatives. Now that Dyson has proven bagless vacuums aren't just viable but widely successful, Hoover suddenly wants in. And they're not interested in licensing. They're not interested in partnership. They're going to compete directly using technology that looks suspiciously like Dyson's patented design. So obviously, Dyson wants to protect his invention, but there's something deeper here. And it goes back to the Ballbarrow again. That memory still burns in his mind about how he lost control, was betrayed by his partners, and had his creation taken from him. And remember Amway in 1985? He sent them confidential information about his vacuum technology for a potential licensing deal, but they copied it. So when Hoover decides to copy his patent, Dyson isn't just thinking about defending his current invention, he's thinking about a pattern, about whether larger companies can simply take what smaller innovators create, about whether that pattern gets to continue. And Dyson makes a decision, it stops now, not with a cease and desist letter that Hoover ignores, not with a settlement negotiation, with a fight. But suing Hoover is terrifying. Let's be clear about this. Hoover is an enormous company with deep pockets and armies of lawyers. Dyson's company, while successful in the UK, is still relatively small by comparison. The legal fees alone would cost millions of pounds, money that could be spent on R&D, new products, on growth. A prolonged legal battle could drag on for years. It's unpredictable. You can't guarantee a win, even with a strong case. There are appeals, delays, surprises, and the whole time you're burning money and management attention on lawyers instead of building better products. The smart business advice, the conventional wisdom, would be don't fight. You can't outspend Hoover in a legal battle. Cutting a deal is better than an open war. Stay ahead by inventing better products rather than getting bogged down in litigation. Move on. That's the sensible argument. And James knows this argument. He's not naive. His CFO is probably making the same argument too. But James is thinking about something else, which is what if he backs down? What message does that send? If Hoover copies his patent and gets away with it, what's going to stop every other manufacturer from doing the same? Samsung, LG, every electronics company that wants to enter the vacuum market, they'll all think, Dyson won't fight us. He'll just move on to the next thing, so copy him and take the profits. Everything James has worked for, 15 years of development, 5,127 prototypes, the financial risk, The patent protection becomes worthless if competitors can just copy him without any consequences. And here's something else. Dyson is thinking about other inventors too, other entrepreneurs. If small companies never fight back when the big guys copy their patents, then the whole patent system itself becomes worthless. If you can't protect your innovation from a big competitor, why would you ever invest the time and money in making the thing in the first place? James has built his company on the premise that you can out-innovate bigger competitors, that patents matter, that a better idea, pursued relentlessly, can beat the incumbents. If he backs down now, he's proving that the whole premise is false. So Dyson sends a letter before action to Hoover in early 1999. And Hoover's response, as Dyson's lawyer later described it, is short shrift. Or put more simply, Hoover doesn't take it seriously. They believe the triple vortex doesn't infringe on Dyson's patents, they're confident in their position, and they have no interest in settling, which ultimately means they're going to court. Dyson has to choose: back down and let Hoover compete with copy technology, or fight and risk enormous legal costs with no guarantee of winning. And here's where James does what he always does when conventional wisdom says one thing. He does the opposite. He decides to fight, not just to defend his patent, but to prove a point. So in October 1999, Dyson files a patent infringement lawsuit against Hoover. Now, the case itself is a little complicated, so let's break it down into what's actually being argued here, because it matters. Hoover's argument is essentially, we're different because we use 3 cyclone stages instead of Dyson's 2. Therefore, not the same technology. But Dyson's lawyer respond, your third stage isn't actually a cyclone unit at all. It doesn't separate or collect dust. It just redirects airflow. You don't have 3 functional cyclone stages. You have 2, just like Dyson's patent. You're just hiding the fact by adding extra plumbing. In other words, Dyson's saying Hoover is doing a sleight of hand, adding a third stage that doesn't do any actual work, so they can claim that their design is different from the patented dual cyclone technology that Dyson invented. The case drags on for over a year. Legal bills are piling up, but Dyson refuses to settle. He refuses to compromise, and he refuses to back down. So what happens from all this? Fast forward to October 2000, and the High Court rules in Dyson's favor. The judge finds that Hoover's triple vortex does indeed infringe on Dyson's patent for dual cyclone technology. But that's not the end of it, because Hoover doesn't accept the verdict. They appeal. So the case goes to the Court of Appeal, which also rules in Dyson's favor. Hoover then petitions again for the right to appeal to the House of Lords, and they're rejected. By October 2002, 3 years of legal battle, the case finally concludes. Hoover is ordered to pay Dyson £4 million in damages plus £2 million in legal costs. That's £6 million total. At the time, it's the largest patent infringement payout in UK history. On top of this, the High Court also issues an injunction that bars Hoover from manufacturing or selling the triple vortex. So let that sink in. Hoover can't sell their bagless vacuum. Their answer to Dyson is taken off the market. The product they thought would compete with Dyson becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when you infringe on someone's patent. So let's zoom out for a second. Now, the financial payout is significant, but that's not the real result of this case. The real result is what it establishes. First, it proves that patents matter. Small companies and individual inventors can defend their innovations against the big guns. The patent system isn't just for the ones in power. David can sue Goliath and win. Second, it sends a message to the competitors. After the Hoover case, every other vacuum manufacturer, Samsung, LG, all of them, they think twice about copying Dyson's technology. They know he'll fight, they know he'll spend the money, and they know he'll win. This is worth far more than £6 million. This creates a moat around Dyson's technology. It's not enough to have better products. You also need to make it legally risky for competitors to copy you. And third, it validates Dyson's entire approach. After all those years of rejections from manufacturers, all those executives telling him his bagless vacuum would never work, all that conventional wisdom saying he should give up, now it's exposed as not just wrong about the market, but wrong enough that when they tried to copy him, they had to pay millions in damages. So interestingly, after the verdict, James makes a public statement that's worth quoting directly. He says, "When we discovered Hoover had stolen one of our patents, we actually tried to settle, to avoid an expensive 3-year court battle, but Hoover refused. So we were forced to defend our patent. Having developed new technology, it's important for Dyson to protect patented inventions and defend all patents. The patent system can work, and I hope this case encourages inventors who have had their ideas stolen by big companies to fight for their patent rights. Notice what he's doing here. He's not just celebrating his own win, he's actually thinking about other inventors, and he's establishing a precedent. He's encouraging people in his position to stand up and fight. And actually, this is exactly what he's been doing his whole career. He's building Dyson as a philosophy. He's proving it's possible to challenge entrenched incumbents. He's showing that you don't need to be the biggest or wealthiest to win. Instead, you need to be better, and you need to have the conviction to defend what you've created. Within a few years, Dyson is the dominant vacuum cleaner brand, not just in the UK, but globally. And a big part of that dominance comes from the fact that competitors can't simply copy his work without consequence. They have to innovate themselves. They have to compete on product quality, not on copying Dyson's patents. That's the legacy of Dyson's decision to fight Hoover. It's not just about £6 million. It's about changing the rules of the game. All right, so we've just walked through 5 pivotal moments in James's journey, 5 moments where he had to choose between the conventional wisdom and his own conviction. So let's step back and pull out what's underneath all this, because this is where the real insights are. And for me, there are 3 common threads here that run through everything we've talked about. The first common thread is to maintain control over your destiny. Every single inflection point, every single one, comes back to this same principle. Be different and maintain total control over your path to being different. When James gets betrayed by the Ballbarrow partners and loses control, the lesson's crystal clear. Never give up control again. When he builds over 5,000 prototypes instead of licensing to manufacturers, it's about keeping control over the outcome. When he ignores the market research and makes the bin transparent despite what consumers supposedly want, it's about trusting his judgment over the conventional wisdom. And when he sues Hoover, it's about protecting his legal right to control his own technology. Control, control, control. Every choice comes back to this. And James says this explicitly. He says, I have sought out originality for its own sake. This is a philosophy which demands difference from what exists. But here's what's subtle. It's not about just being different for its own sake. It's about maintaining control so you can be genuinely different. Because the moment you give up control, your ability to be different disappears. You get pulled back towards the middle, towards what's safe, and toward what's already proven. Think about how radical this is as an idea for your business. Most entrepreneurship advice says the opposite. Listen to your customers, follow the data, bring in experienced advisors, raise capital from smart investors. All of that assumes that you should be influenced by external feedback and expertise. But Dyson completely inverts this. Trust yourself. Ignore the experts. Maintain control, even if it's harder and riskier. And this is really, really hard to do. It requires both supreme confidence and supreme stubbornness. And Dyson doesn't apologize for it. He says it directly. For vision, one might equally read stubbornness. I am claiming nothing but the virtues of a mule. He's literally comparing himself to a mule. That's the level of stubbornness we're talking about. But here's what makes this idea actually work, rather than just being delusional stubbornness. Dyson pairs it with enormous amounts of learning and iteration. He's not pursuing a fixed, rigid idea. James is stubbornly pursuing a direction while remaining radically flexible about the solution. And it's that combination that's actually powerful. The second common thread that you notice going through James's inflection points is his relationship with failure. And I really want to sit with this one because it's profound. Most people experience failure as discouragement. Something doesn't work, you feel stupid, defeated, like maybe you should quit. Our entire education system reinforces this. Wrong answers are bad. Failure gets punished with low grades. Success is measured by getting things right on the first try. Meanwhile, James has completely inverted that relationship. For him, failure isn't discouraging. Failure is information. And again, just to repeat this quote from James, because it's brilliant, I made 5,127 prototypes in my vacuum before I got it right. There were 5,126 failures, but I learned from each one. That's how I came up with the solution. Think about the psychology required for that statement. It's not that Dyson enjoys failing. He's a human being after all. He's honest about frustrating days, about times when progress goes backwards, but he's reframed failure from evidence that I'm wrong to information about what doesn't work. That's how you build a company that changes an entire industry. And the third common thread is what guides James when he has to make a decision. And this one is subtle, but crucial. In every inflection point, every single one, there's a moment where external signals point in one direction. Market research, expert opinion, conventional wisdom, smart advice from experienced people, all saying one thing. And Dyson's internal conviction says something completely different, and he has to choose. And which one does he trust? Again, it goes back to James's experiences with Jeremy Fry in those formative years of his career, the just build it mentality. Don't trust the experts, trust your own observation and experimentation. All throughout these inflection points, the pattern repeats itself. External consensus says X, Dyson's conviction is Y, and he goes with Y. That said, and this is really important, it's not blind conviction. It's not arrogance. It's conviction earned through direct experience. James's circle of competence in how vacuum cleaners work comes from the fact that he spent years and years and years in that shed refining and iterating prototypes to understand what works. There's a difference between knowing something intellectually and knowing it in your bones, through your hands, through direct experience. Dyson knows the problems that people have with vacuum cleaners because he feels it through his entire body. It's just so different from how most entrepreneurs look for opportunities. They look for market gaps, underserved customer segments, inefficiencies they can exploit. But Dyson looks for things that frustrate him personally, and he obsessively works to solve them. That combination is what generates unbelievable innovations. Not market research, not consultants, not strategic planning, frustration, and persistence. So taking a step back, these three common threads work together. If you want to maintain control and be truly different, you have to be comfortable with failure. It's a prerequisite for being a successful entrepreneur, because being different means going into uncharted territory where failure is guaranteed. You can't be genuinely new without failing repeatedly. And you have to trust your own conviction over what external voices are telling you. Because the whole world is going to tell you that what you're doing is wrong, or impossible, or crazy. And if you believe them, you'll quit. These aren't just business principles, by the way. They're a set of ideas for how to operate in the world, a way of seeing problems, a way of making decisions, and a way of relating to failure and feedback and other people's opinions. And they're really, really hard to execute, which is probably why there's only one James Dyson. Most people can only do one of these things. Some people can do two, but to do all three consistently for decades while maintaining your conviction, even as everyone around you is telling you that you're wrong, that takes a particular kind of psychological makeup. And Dyson even acknowledges this about himself. He's not claiming this is the right path for everyone. He's just saying it's the path that worked for him. And it worked because he was willing to pay the price. So here's what keeps coming back to me about James's story. He succeeded not despite ignoring conventional wisdom. He succeeded because he ignored it. Think about this. Every time Dyson did what he was supposed to do, listened to partners, followed market research, took the safe path, things went wrong. He lost the Ballbarrow. He got close to giving up, but every time he trusted his own judgment instead, things worked out. Now, to make an important distinction, I'm not saying you should just ignore all advice and feedback. That's obviously foolish. Dyson didn't operate in a vacuum, if you pardon the pun. He was constantly learning, constantly iterating, constantly testing his ideas against reality. His 5,127 prototypes weren't stubborn arrogance, they were curiosity. But here's the key. He was filtering all that learning through his own direct experience and conviction. The thing about conventional wisdom is it exists because it works. Most of the time, for most people, in most situations. It's conventional because it works often enough that people follow it. But by definition, conventional wisdom cannot produce exceptional results. If you do what everyone else does, you get what everyone else does. Again, that phrase is worth repeating. If you do what everyone else does, you get what everyone else does. Think about what that means for your own ambitions, for the thing that you're building. What if you gave yourself permission to fail 5,000 times, not to give up after 5,000 tries, but to see each failure as information, as a clue, and as one step closer to the answer? I know that's scary, and it's supposed to be, but the ones who succeed are the ones who navigate that harder path and come out of the other side. They create things that change industries, and they build companies that reshape how people think about entire categories of products. They do the work that matters, and they do the work that lasts. What I think James Dyson teaches us is this: conviction doesn't come from validation. It comes from direct experience, from frustration, from standing in your coach house and knowing in your bones that you're onto something even when nobody else believes it yet. And that conviction, when paired with the willingness to fail repeatedly and the discipline to learn from each failure, is unstoppable. That's James Dyson. And that's what happens when you trust yourself. Thank you for joining us on Inflection Moments. If today's story sparked a new perspective or challenged your thinking, be sure to share it with someone you know loves this stuff as much as you and I do. Maybe it's a college buddy, your water cooler buddy, or maybe even someone in the family group chat. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to our channels so you can be the first one to hear what we've got coming next. And if you're interested in insights, ideas, and lessons from some of the world's greatest entrepreneurs, sign up for our newsletter. The link is in the show notes. Until next time, keep building and talk soon.